What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And my wonderful, kind, and very patient guest today, because I screwed up a couple times, is Dr. Manny St. Victor. Hello, Doctor.
Yes, sir. Hello, Gary. Pleasure to meet you.
You too. You too. And thanks again for my little faux pas there. I don't know how I did that, but we
Not
we
a
got you and
problem.
we're good to go. But
All's well that ends well,
um
and here we are.
right? That's what matters is we're here. So if it's okay with you, I'm just gonna fire off your bio real quick and then we'll jump
Sure.
in the pool.
Mhm.
Right on. Everybody, we have Manny St. Victor, MD, is a certified hypnotherapist who helps high achievers overcome mental barriers and unlock the power of their subconscious mind. After 2 years as a psychiatry resident, Dr. St. Victor changed course to pursue a more holistic approach to mental wellness. Leveraging a decade of experience as a video game developer, he explored the intersections among artificial intelligence, systems theory, and mental health. His journey culminated in the creation of archetype.
Arch- Archetypal memory reconsolidation.
That one, MAR. We're going to get archetypal memory resistance. We're going to get this. An evidence based method that integrates narrative psychology, neuroscience, and technology to harness the brain's natural hearing processes. By blending these diverse fields, Dr. St. Victor has developed an innovative framework that brings science, creativity, and mental wellness. His approach helps people improve their performance across all areas of their lives and enjoy guilt free fulfillment. I'm all about guilt free fulfillment.
Right?
I'm all about.
Not fulfilling if it's feeling guilty, right?
Right? Exactly. It just doesn't feel as good if it's not. So thank you again. And like I mentioned, I just have one question for us out the gate. We're
hmm
the What If You Could podcast. So I just asked all my guests, have you had a what if you could moment? Is there a what if you could thought for us you'd like to share?
Mine would have to be what if I could know what I've learned along the way a lot earlier. And ultimately, I think I've always felt like I was born too early because I was an undergrad. I graduated in 1995, which is apparently when Java emerged and the web started to get webby. And so at the time, the whole concept of working with software wasn't taken seriously enough. So my parents, I was good at science, so, we worked hard. I went to Harvard undergrad, and my parents were like, "You're not gonna play with a computer for Harvard, not for 40K a year." And so I went the traditional path, studied. I was pre-med biochem and psychology minor. And from there, I went to medical school as expected. I took a lot of time off in between because the computers world was calling me. Since I was 9, I was glued to them because it's fascinating. Um, and I actually thought that a brain surgeon would be more like a computer programmer, but then I got to medical school and gross anatomy, and I was like, yeah, not gonna be a surgeon. And plus, the thoughts aren't in there anyway, so I can't cut them out. So ultimately, artificial intelligence became increasingly fascinating to me. So a lot of times, I was even during my psychiatry residency, I was working with the software. I found myself in the video game industry where I got to do a lot of creating. NPGs, non-player NPC, yeah, non-player like game characters. And along the way, I started bumping into the intersection and realizing that a lot of the guys like Gregory Bateson, um, a lot of the guys who were doing the original work in cybernetics were actually coming up with what ended up being family therapy. With Milton Erickson, the whole field of artificial intelligence and systems theory blossomed into these multiple fields. So the stuff that in each field they were telling me that I need to get my head on straight and decide something, turns out that they all had the same underlying model. And so I didn't have to feel as if I was missing out on something in life by being in one of the two and moving forward, which unfortunately most of my life was spent in one or the other, kind of half-assing it. Both cheeks were there. I just didn't know they were together, so to speak. Um, so ultimately, when they came together, I got a lot of peace, and I got to basically wholeheartedly pursue something without feeling that there was something I was leaving behind. What it allowed me to do is to be present and passionate. It also allowed me to find other people who were intersecting them. But turns out that, like I said, after I left, when I took time off from my medical school to go do software, at the time, it was like, medicine was way more tribal. So it was like, you idiot, you know, you grow up. We don't do that. But later on, medicine became a lot more inclined to let people take time off, to think, to bring things back to medicine, etc. So I think if I had been younger now, especially with what artificial intelligence can do, because I was writing code on my Commodore 64 and recording it to a cassette deck, you know, and I was typing stuff out of Run Magazine, which meant that if you missed a semicolon, and I don't even think it was semicolons then, which meant if you miss a parentheses bar with your brother reading it out to you, he's still bitter. It's been like 40 years. He hasn't let it go. But if you miss the simplest thing, you no longer have your Pac-Man dot running through your dash, dash and vertical line maze. So now, honestly, with the latest of GPT and the latest of Claude engines and even Grok, you can put in a command and it will develop the whole game for you. Yeah, so it becomes you're more connected to the idea now. And as someone who believes in like the extended mind theory, that everything around us, the only reason it's there, honestly, is because we have affordances for it. We can use it. Um, therefore, mind is around us. If a room is cluttery, your thought process is also, part of my French, clusterfucky, you know? So
Yeah.
it just extended mind basically um allowed me to combine uh what I know about software with what I've learned along in psychiatry and see that and hypnotherapy ended up providing me with a linguistic architecture and NLP, which is hierarchical, which is exactly how software works, and like these embedded parts. And it allowed me to help people uh, from where they are. They can communicate what they're experiencing. We can get to the root of why you're experiencing what you're experiencing, and the feedback loops take care of the rest. So it's not like we're going to put some medicine in you that's going to change the way your serotonin works, with all the gut side effects, and the bogginess, yet you still don't feel you. When you do the work as it is now, especially with memory reconsolidation, you get permanent solutions. The thing that used to trigger you into that uh disempowered state, the thing that triggered the trauma that led you to avoid relationships, there's a way to eliminate that at the core while leaving your memories free, and you get the opportunity to live. Yeah, so that's where we are now with the science.
Wow, Doc. Okay, you just blew up so much stuff for me. I already covered a page of notes. So, but there's one thing I've got to start with before I jump into the other stuff, and it's
Sure.
what did your parents say when you're bailing on Harvard to go to do video games? Did they just
A
lose
lot,
their
a
mind?
lot of things. So many things, so many times. Yeah, they found it to be heartbreaking, and I guess they still, um I think it still wounds them because they were so happy to my parents, are Haitian, so they came to the US, they still have their thick accents, and here they have this child that will sit alone a lot and think, apparently. And so I had this opportunity, and their model was with this opportunity, you know, and this was pre Clinton healthcare type stuff. So if I'd have followed through, brain surgeons were making flat out 1 million, no exaggeration.
Yeah.
But the more,
And they deserved it.
yeah, 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 because they were exchanging their youth and sanity for it.
Yeah.
But it just it was not uh there's a feeling that I get when I'm in something meaningful, and it happens naturally.
Mhm.
Like when I'm in hypno,
Yeah.
even though I've always labeled myself ADD, when I'm working with someone face to face in hypno, there is no time. We can sit there and I can hear just about every thought they're having, and I don't get jittery, I don't get distracted. I'm there. And it wasn't like that in med school. I could be doing, I could be helping with a surgery, wrist deep in parts, and still my mind would be, I wonder if they're going to have that sandwich for lunch by the time I get out of here. And that's not what you want. I promise that's not what you want from your brain surgeon. So,
So, did you just have this love for computers? I mean, right when they showed up at the gate, that was just like,
yep,
dude, I'm
I
just
was 9.
digging that. You went
I was
right down the
9 and
rabbit
I'm
hole on
52
that.
now. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
basically they had a class, Richard Schechter. He was teaching a class and I was 9 in basic. And I took it. I took it a second time. And then when I showed up in the class the third time, he's like, you know what? You're the TA now. He's like, you are my assistant. I'm not gonna have you sitting in here, like acting like, and so, he took me under his wing when I was like 9. And um I bumped into another kid, Keith. Still remember Keith because he could do backflips and I couldn't. But Keith was also pretty geeked out. And then that was around the time that that movie, I think it was Whiz Kids, came out. That I'm dating myself, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Keith and I like spent so much time, after school, they would let us kind of sit around before the teachers went home and just use this pet computer. It was like green screen, whatever. And it's just, to me, it's always been like when I'm with the machine, there is no time.
Yeah.
And then when I realized that when you're talking to someone and your goal is to not diagnose them and put them in boxes and fill out papers so you can argue with a high schooler who's going to tell you that you can't, you can't give them that plan, that prescription, or that care because their boss at the insurance company said so. Once you eliminate those things, then you can be with a person and give them an hour, 90 minutes, couple times a week, and sit there and just discover the world they have in there. And yeah, I,
So
I just,
how did that transition start? How did that transition go from I'm gonna go to medical school, I'm gonna become a brain surgeon. No, I freaking my heart and my soul and my gut and my brain are in computing
Mhm.
and how that works. I geek down on that. That's where my joy comes from. To then using the computing aspect and that what you have within your mind, geeking out on the computing, to then go into how the mind works. How did that come together like that?
accidentally. Uh, so as I was learning like the fundamentals of artificial intelligence, ultimately it was like, how are they making these computers smarter? And initially it was algorithms, just A star, stuff like that, where you would have the computer able to do a couple limited things. But at some point, I don't remember when, I was geeking, I came across control theory. And control theory basically says that um, in order to keep the outside looking a certain way, um, you know, well, it evolved to perceptual control theory, PC. Yeah, perceptual control theory. And essentially, it says that in order to keep the world looking a certain way, we act a certain way. So, uh, one of the best examples would be, let's say I go in a room and I believe myself to be dominant. If I believe myself to be dominant, I'll go in the room, and if someone else also believes themselves to be dominant and they're trying to treat me subservient, I'm going to keep turning up my dominance until I get my identity back.
Yeah.
In perceptual control theory, your identity narrative, which is what's at the very top, kind of controls everything else all the way down. I thought that was mind blowing. And then somehow or other, I don't remember, I realized that robotics work the same way, like a lot of the robotic stuff. Uh, and then later on, I think in med school, I started learning like Bayes for diagnosis. And then somehow or other, I bumped to the Bayesian brain. And the Bayesian brain led me to perceptual, not perceptual, um, what's it? Predictive coding,
What's
which
the
is
Bayesian brain?
Bayesian brain is the simplest way to put it is your brain is out there guessing all day, and it guesses and it gets feedback that it's wrong. But with the feedback that is wrong, it does this calculation where it combines that with the what they call likelihood. So you have the likelihood. How much did I actually believe my brain, and then how much do I believe the outside? So if I believe my brain more than the outside, I'm going to try my best to bring the outside to in line with my mind. But if I keep hitting these walls, at some point I either got to change my mind or get a padded room somewhere because reality hits hard, you know?
And it's
So,
called Blaine theory?
well, it's Bayesian brain, but you take it even further, there's something called predictive coding, which it's a beautiful model. But ultimately, predictive coding says that you have a belief. This belief is activated as an expectation. You have a certain amount of confidence about that expectation. Now, you're going to walk out in the world and you're really guessing what the world looks like. And then there's a concept of self evidencing where you're trying to prove to yourself that it's out there. So if I walk into a room and my brain is, we're not really seeing what's in the room. We're seeing our guesses. That's why you can walk into a room and not see something that's right there. So if
Wow.
let's say it's foggy out, when it's foggy out, you're going to rely more on the guesses than what you see because the signal from the outside is kind of noisy. But if it's clear out and you say see a person standing there, you're going to assume they're there and be pretty confident that the signal from the outside is what you need to update your brain. There is a person there. I agree, as
Yeah.
opposed to walking into them. So that there's so many other things that go with that, and then taking it even further, I came across simulation adaptation theory of hypnosis, SATH. And by then, yeah, it showed like literally how this stuff worked, how we're able to sit with someone, understand their world, and by basically sitting there with them and hearing their world and helping them shift their perspective, you change what they see about themselves, about what they can do, about how the world works. And this is much more powerful than giving you some pills so you'll sit down and not, you know, not do what the voices tell you to, you know?
Is this what we outsiders who've never gone through hypnosis except maybe seen it on TV, is this where you just, now you're getting sleepy with the stopwatch and put them
Yeah,
under, but you're
yeah,
still talking to them. You're still
yeah,
walking them through.
yeah.
So they're
Yeah,
they're
and we're not under. We're walking around in sort of a different consciousness. We're walking around in the projection of our imagination.
wow.
Okay.
I
And
I like
so there's
that.
this concept called phenomenological control. It's like phenomena
Hmm.
with logical control. And it turns out that that's what determines the extent to which you could bend reality to be what you see it to be. There's a lot of people out there that once their expectation, the prior in the Bayesian brain, gets their mind on something, it will create it. You'll see it, you'll hear it. And as long as you have a certain amount of reality testing, you don't get to get the padded room. You get to be out there aware. A
Because
lot of
it's
these
this
people,
close to schizophrenia, right? I mean, when you
it's
just
it's even closer. Like even put the fingers together because with impaired reality testing, the
yeah.
Bayesian brain model, the priors get messed up, the expectations. And in order to make the world make sense, this top down and bottom up kind of bump together and create this complexity that ultimately the person will be like, okay, everywhere I go, I'm seeing these aliens. I must be their leader, blah blah blah. And then so now that distorted prior expectation, wherever they go, because the signal from under here is either not coming in right or not being processed right enough to adjust the expectation and the belief, you end up with hallucinations. And then on top of that, in order to balance them out, you end up with these beliefs. So
So
believing is
you
seeing. So
So even someone who maybe isn't at that level of schizophrenia, or someone who is like, you're dealing with successful business people.
yeah,
Or I mean, we all have mental blocks, right? That's
right.
why that's why, Steve Jobs is mad. He's insane to a lot of people,
Yeah,
or Elon Musk is insane, or these
yeah,
people who are brilliant seem crazy to us in a lot of
yeah. They
ways.
see a
And
different model.
right? And so, but yet many people have the same similar computing power in
Almost
our
all of us.
head.
Almost all of us.
right? So you're able to take people and go, okay, let's get your computing power and let's focus it. Is that what
Hmm.
maybe get it
Yeah,
more focused for people who
yeah.
want to do?
Let's focus it and let's shift perspectives. Let's a lot of hypnosis. My favorite version of uh favorite models of hypnosis are Ericksonian therapy, like Milton Erickson. What he found was you didn't have to be like you're getting sleepy. And a lot of the times when people said someone was resistant, it was because you weren't talking to them in a way that was meaningful to them. And that means lack of rapport. It means I feel as if you're asking me about myself, but you're asking so you can judge. There's a lot of things we can feel. And if we don't have that rapport and that trust, two things are going to happen. One, I'm not closing my eyes and let you say things into my brain if I don't trust you. So, I will not
Right?
quack like a duck, not today.
I already have
And
trust issues, okay? I'm
right,
just not
right,
going there.
right. There will be no clucking like a chicken today. Uh, and so what Erickson did is he decided that he used called it utilization. He decided that whatever the person was doing, that was their gateway into trance because we walk around all day in trance. It's
Yeah,
just that we drive it. Like driving trance, speaking of which, is the one where you're like, how did I get here? You
yeah,
know?
yeah,
If there's someone that triggers us where every time we see them, we lock in, we can't see the rest of the world, and we immediately have rage, that person can knock you into a rage.
yeah.
Anytime you say, I wasn't myself, I got knocked out of character, that means someone yanked you out of your core narrative script, yanked you into another archetype, and had you behave that way. And a lot of times in those situations, the part of you that was able to say love the person, you can't access that because that person, you're too busy having them in the other story.
Yeah.
So Erickson realized that by stepping into whatever the person was seeing, into the priors and the Bayesian ray, by stepping into there, the person got less defensive and they felt understood. Because they knew you could see what they saw, they then allowed you to suggest some things as if through their eyes. Once you know that I'm standing next to you and I'm not judging and I'm not gonna everything you tell me devalue it, like that's a dumb idea. Once I realize that's not what's coming next, then I can kind of let my ego go and step into your story. And if I'm in your story and I look around, focused enough, then I can say to you, okay, did you notice that there's a door over here too? You know, because if we're present and we stay in that place, you're like, oh, so in my belief now, someone I trust has told me, look to the left a little bit, and there's a door. So, and it might be that you go home and there's a room in your house where, and door is kind of a concrete version, but one of the simplest exercises that I've done with a client that was powerful was I kind of challenged her to notice her daughter's facial expressions. And she's like, oh, that's silly, whatever. But what happens when you actually slow down enough to notice someone's facial expressions is you realize how much of what you see in them is really a projection of your mood in the moment. A lot of times when she was busy trying to get something done and her daughter was annoying, being annoying, by slowing down and seeing the expressions, she picked up the micro expressions. She can see that sometimes her daughter was feeling confused. What was annoying bounciness was looking for a connection. A lot of ADD labeled stuff is a person trying to establish a connection with you, especially as a parent or attachment figure. And so she found that by slowing down, a lot of the she was able to catch a lot of the that her daughter would do when she wasn't done talking and she was walking away from her. She was able to learn her daughter's personality, like a real personality, and it just the simplest of things, if you can point out to someone something that's in their world that they haven't seen, and because they haven't seen it, they haven't up to their mind up to include it. Yeah. And in her case, she was so busy working hard to make sure her kids had everything, that she hadn't tapped into the signals the kids were sending to the specific need that would allow them to move to the next version of themselves.
Yeah.
Because without the external
That puts
validation,
a lot of stress on a parent too. I
mhm,
mean, you don't want to not see those signals. You don't want
yeah,
to not, be that toned into your child.
yeah,
But like you said, we're just in a fog so much,
yeah.
and we're also just struggling. It's a lot of times we just don't even have that focus. How much of your humor? How much does your sense of humor play into your therapy? And is that safe place for you? Is there places you could drop that in, or is it not a
Um,
safe place with you? Because
when
you're
I was
funny.
in thank you. When I was in my psychiatry residency, not so much because,
I
one of
didn't
the
like that.
signs one of the signs of, like, schizophrenia is, like, the absence of the metaphorical thinking to realize that, that I'm in the middle of doing some transcontextual thinking. You know, I'm saying something that is absurd to everyone.
Yeah.
When someone walks around and the majority of stuff is baseline absurd, they don't need you to add, salt and pepper to their already pre-seasoned experience.
Yeah.
So, um, and yeah, so basically in med school, not so much. And plus there's the doctor personality where everything you say, you have to make sure that you're communicating clearly because, you don't want to make a joke about death and then the person like, malpractice. That's a terrible punchline. Malpractice is never like a good way to end it. It's either you have tomatoes thrown at you, I guess. But so it wasn't encouraged there. And the more I learned the more it was like hypnosis is about rapport. It's about you and a person tuning into a frequency so that the relational field does the healing. And so if you're being inauthentic in that space, a person can sense it. You're going to misstep. You're going to not hear what they're saying closely enough. And you're going to do what they call stepping on their trance. You're going
Yeah.
to say something. And if you need to be right more than you need that person to be present, then you're going to impose your narrative on them. And I always tell my folks, I can't put anything in you, and I wouldn't want to, that's not in there. So sometimes, like I joke that the more I practice, I've been what 13 years I'm going on? Yeah, 20, yeah, about 13 years. The more of this stuff I learn, the more I feel like I study to be quieter, because when you learn to just sit down and shut up, that's what the quieter you are, the more people will pay to hear themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
paying to hear
And
me
I think
babble.
the trust comes in when you are listening more than talking. It's funny, you could meet
Except in interviews
someone.
and podcasts, just to be clear.
Yeah. But you can meet someone and you can sit there and not say a word. They don't know your name, they don't know anything about you, and they walk away and go, "That was the nicest person. I really enjoyed that person. They were
Yep,
really special."
yep.
And you didn't say anything. You just
Stephen
asked
Covey.
questions
you know?
and you made them feel special, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But when
Most
you sit
interesting
there and
person in the
talk at
room.
someone for 20 minutes, they just walk away going, "That guy's a
Yeah,
jerk. I didn't
yeah,
like that guy." So
yeah,
there's really something about letting people just
yeah,
talk,
yeah. They're
being
going
there
into the
to
room to meet
accept.
themselves.
Yeah.
When they pay you a lump of money, they're not paying to be entertained. They're not paying to be judged or chastised. They're paying for you to hold space and shut up. And the more the field draws out of them, the more they leave. Like, Was I hypnotized?" And you're like, "I don't know. Were you?" And then they go home and, interesting things happen. They notice different things. I had one client who, the main thing she noticed was that when she walked over the mirror, past the mirror now, she actually would stop and look and she would see herself. She wouldn't just walk past the mirror like, "Oh, I'm fat, whatever, whatever," because she had like a weight thing. She was able to look and realize, hmm, I have some gray hairs coming in. Oh, my weight, actually I'm a comfortable size, and she was joking. She's like, "Yeah," I'm like, "Oh, I'm a sexy beast." And what went downhill from that was a demeanor and a receptiveness to flirtation, where her husband and her, their chemistry changed because she, the way she received the compliments from him changed because she didn't feel as if he was tripping, trying to get something out of her, or trying to leverage or something, or just flattery because he's stuck there. Yeah, she was able to allow the space, to be reseduced.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's a
so,
whole the whole thing about trust, trusting someone else,
mhm,
trusting yourself, trusting your gut, trusting what you see, and like you've said that a number of times about, we just don't see,
mhm,
and you're able to focus people, say, well, let's focus on reality of
mhm,
what is actual, not what your brain's convincing you to see. Like, you look at someone who's so so horribly anorexic. They're down to 57 pounds and they see themselves as fat. And
Yeah,
they just can't get out of that vision, right? It's
yeah,
horrible.
yeah. And it's futile because they have that feeling that if they could do just a little bit more of the thing, they
Yeah.
would get to the place. And the place doesn't exist outside of you. The place exists in you sitting here without the stories to realize there is only one place here now. You know,
Yeah.
you can't be someone else, you can't be somewhere else, and you can't be someone else. So sit your hands down and let it in.
What's a typical session like? I mean, so someone comes in and they say, I'm killing it. I'm doing good. I'm like, but I know I can get to the next level. I know that I could take this to another level, but for some reason I keep self-sabotaging myself, right?
Yeah,
I'll make a wrong move when I know I should have gone, I go left when I know I should have gone right. I mean, anyone in business has done that. I've done that myself a million times.
yeah,
So when they come to you with that, where do you go with that? How do you get someone over that top?
yeah. Well, the first question is always, what is this next level you're talking about? Yeah, because
Great question. Yeah.
ultimately, wherever you are now that you're so busy trying to get away from, um, there's a pretty reasonable chance that we run on expectation and intention. That's what the top down is. We project these expectations out. And what they say, what got you here won't get you there, because we have our heads down and we have a set of things we've been doing that have been working, and so we're kind of you know headbutting our way through the world because it got us quote successful. uh, when you slow someone down and get them in the present, then they can look at the models they're using to succeed, air quotes. They can uh, ask themselves what's missing and why what they're doing thus far is creating the experience of it missing. Like if you're staying ungodly late hours at night, is it because there's a bulletproof narrative in you that you've never done enough? And so if you've never done enough, and I'll tell you, like around 2014, I had this depression where I was, I had this beautiful house that was the worst prison ever. you know, it was like I had this
Been
view,
there.
and then like you'll be
There.
sitting there, you're looking at this stuff, and
Yep.
yet I was unhappy there. And even though we hadn't furnished most of the house, I swear, because I had one child, you know,
Yeah.
um, I was looking at this bigger neighborhood across the way with the gates and everything, and I was like, you know what? Happy is over there somewhere. So the next level I had was going to cause me more suffering with more work hours,
Yep.
because during that time it was, I think I read somewhere that they were saying that a person is as happy as they feel they're better than their neighbor. More better, part of the grammar, the more better I feel like am than my neighbor, the happier I tell myself I'm supposed to be. So it's not about keeping up with the Joneses so much as letting the Joneses know that you're ahead of them, letting them know that you are indeed the Joneses, you know. And so
I'm not just keeping up with the Joneses. I
yeah,
am
I
the
am.
Joneses.
I
All
am.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why, you got the new hotness off the lot. And,
Yep.
suddenly you point out to your neighbor that, his iPhone 16 is not as cool as your 16 plus with 512 gigs, you know? And, um, the simplicity of just in real time, the social competing that we do, it keeps us outside of what we're actually feeling. It keeps us extrinsically motivated, and any extrinsic motivation results in habituation. That's one of the parts of SAS, simulation adaptation theory. The A is adaptation. At
Yeah.
some point, the information coming up, when you turn your attention to it, because your brain only needs new information to adapt, it tunes out the thing. You know, 4 shots won't do it anymore. Now it's got to be eight. And eight won't do it if you would slow down enough to realize that. But you start at the first one, hoping to get to a feeling that you haven't got since college or something. And when we slow someone down and get them in the present, they can look around and see the things that they have that they wanted so badly. And ask themselves
Is
how
that
that
what the
feels.
hypnosis part does? Is that
Mhm.
slows them down,
Yeah,
just kind of
it makes you
takes them
parasympathetic.
to a level of chaos that we all
Yeah,
live in,
yeah,
to just taking it down a level and say,
yeah.
okay, let's now just try to focus. And you can't focus at chaos level. It's
Yep,
impossible, right?
that's
So
exactly
you
it.
drop them down into a mindset or a mode or a
Mhm.
feeling with the hypnosis
Yeah,
to just slow their stuff down and say, okay,
mhm.
now from here we can grow.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the things that, when they use hypnosis for anesthesia, one of the first things they do is allow you to realize that the only things that exist within your narrative are the things you represent.
Mm,
So, if I can get you to stop running away from the pain long enough for you to stop creating the construct of this painful thing and you being symbolically exhausted from constantly trying to get away from this pain to the point where it's like which way are you running,
right,
away from is not a place.
right,
You can't like if you're like that's the whole out of the frying pan to the fire. If you can get someone to we suffer to the extent that we hold on to something that's no longer there, representing it with the same intensity that it was at when it first hit you. You
wow,
know, if
yeah,
you had something happen when you were 8 that
yeah.
you've used to refuse to allow yourself to have that situation happen again, you'll never realize that really, like when you go back to visit the old neighborhood, you realize those trees were not that tall. Now the one that broke your arm, no, that bad boy was tall. You know, but you like you never go back and reevaluate these things with your current mind.
Yeah.
So one of the powerful things in hypno is you allow a person to dissociate and externalize. Like one of the main techniques we use is imagine you're looking at a movie screen, you know, and this movie screen you have the control for it. So you introduce control. A lot of us have these situations when we were younger where we didn't have control. And so maybe in the scene, you can play the movie right up to the point at which the trauma happened. And I want you to pause it, and by pausing it, and that's where the archetypal memory reconsolidation happens. When you bring someone right up to the cue of an experience and you do a freeze frame, you can rewrite what happens on the other side. And it's a slight nudge. It's almost like, okay, go back in the past and provide yourself with the resource that you needed then, even though now you've convinced yourself that you can't use it. When I tell you to go back and give it to small self, then you're like, oh, yeah, you'll give it to small self. And small self, you know, you change the story you have about yourself in there because you considered a counterfactual. You considered another possibility. So
Is
your
that now?
body,
I hacked that name super bad. So when you're talking about this, and you created your AMR, which I'm
Mhm.
not going to try to say. I'm going to let you say. Is that what AMR is? Is that what
Mhm,
your work is with people? So
mhm.
tell us again about the creation you did with, and say with the MAR again.
Archetypal memory reconsolidation, AMR.
Yes.
Yeah. So
So when you put this together, so it's an evidence-based method that integrates narrative psychology,
Mhm,
neuroscience, and technology to
mhm.
harness the brain and help with natural processing.
Yeah.
So is is AMR, is that hypnotherapy, or it's that combination of the things?
Um, I have a mentor who says everything is hypnosis.
All
Because
right.
if you couldn't be hypnotized, you couldn't function. Because to a certain extent, in order to think, you have to create some sort of metaphors, some sort of story, and then you have to allow yourself to be the main character in that story enough to feel it. It's like when you go over a friend's house back in the day and watch them play the Atari all day. It's not the same. Give me the controller,
Right.
joystick, like so I can be the square that's bouncing or whatever. Um, the simple act of, and the example I gave you was the movie screen. The simple act of allowing yourself to step outside of this space and shift perspective allows you to see yourself, um, and imagine yourself or conceive of yourself. And a lot of people, like I said, with the phenomenological control, they can see themselves outside of themselves. It's pretty cool what your brain can do when you let it. So when we're outside of ourselves, everything feels more distant. So if I was having an argument with someone and I can't see it from any different way, the second I dissociate and see it, then I can basically, if I truly do it, I can see me and the person arguing, and I could actually see what I look like being butt-headed to them. I can see them trying different ways to communicate, and me, throwing elbows to keep my reality that I'm guarding from within there intact. Because what we don't like is when, like you said, when we're under threat, we're trying to protect ourselves from ego death, and ego is narrative. Whatever story I tell myself, in the beginning, we talked about perceptual control theory, where there's an uncertainty that we have that feels worse than the worst pain ever. There's no fall like the fall you imagine is waiting for you at, the impact at the bottom of the bottomless, unfathomable well.
Yeah.
You fall 6 feet, it hurts 6 feet worth. You fall 100 feet, it you probably don't notice, but it hurts 100 people. Now, you fall and you don't know when you're gonna land. Your imagination gotta wonder, how long am I gonna be screaming and dreading? How hard am I gonna hit? What's my body gonna look like, even though I won't be there? What if I fall forever and I starve to death instead? There's all these things that even as an adult, we won't say, I am thinking these things, because again, back to the padded room you go. But we have these stories that run in us, and they're archetypal stories. They're stories that the same reason that, I don't know if you've seen the videos where they put a stick next to a cat on the floor and the cat sees it and the cat jumps like 30 feet.
Yeah.
We're wired for stuff like that. When you see a shadow up there, you don't you get amygdala hijacked. You don't go to the, "Hmm, I wonder if statistically speaking that what are the likelihoods of that being a pterodactyl about to swoop me up, etc." We we could talk about the rest right after I've done ruck hide, run, duck, hide, and swim myself. These are the things I needed to get out the way, and then we can talk.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
so and sometimes, um, if it was scary enough, we never hop out of that state when that cue happens. Like when I was working at the VA, if you dropped a tray, you can hear the rattling of people getting under their beds because the sound they heard in the hallway, they were not going to come out and be like, was that indeed similar to the bomb that took this leg that I'm missing off? You know? And
Yeah.
and if when you're running, the existential threat is enough that you create a permanent memory of that situation, again, predictive brain, the second you see the cue that lets you know that might happen again, your system doesn't ask what is reality. Your system asks which way and how fast. Can I get to continue to live this smaller, more constrained, more afraid life? But what I did say in there was life, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so AMR basically, um, what I realized was a lot of times my clients, especially those who I get to work with a lot of doctors, which is cool, and lawyers, but I work with a lot of high performers who had to be right.
Mm.
And here's the funny thing about right. Right has there's no actual objective right. Right is, in med school and in residency, right was whatever this guy decided was right in that moment. And a
Mhm.
lot of times working with a patient, right was dice roll, please let all the stuff I studied have been right. And let this be the one case that the universe didn't have an exception. So when you're working with docs and like lawyers and high pressure people, when you relax them enough, they get to realize that this is a safe place. There's nothing to be afraid of. Yet, if I ask you to choose blue or yellow, which one you prefer, you don't know which one you prefer because you're trying to figure out which one you want me to hear you say. Yeah. And we're all wired for that to a certain extent, that people pleasing. And when we slow down and tune out the noise of external validation, we're able to hear our own values. And the clarification of values allows for intrinsic motivation, which is the only thing that you don't have to sop on more of for it to um, continue to work. anything extrinsic, whether it's hugs or songs or Coke, you're going to need more because habituation. Intrinsic motivation is quiet and like it's an emotional warm bath, you know? So
How much fear is involved in it for your clients? I mean, how many people come to you
all of
and
it.
they can't let the fear go of letting you in?
With me, I don't really have that problem with folks. 'Cause I got you. You know, I think I listen enough so that, and this is part of the Ericksonian training. Ericksonian utilization means that when you watch someone and they realize that you're not trying to get them into a certain situation. You know, I don't need you to close your eyes. I don't need you to breathe lightly or whatever. If you're anxious, we're going to do it from your anxiety because that's where you live.
Yeah.
You know, Erickson would do this thing where he would say to someone, like if a guy was pacing really fast, people would be like, well, he's resistant. He doesn't want to listen to the hypno. Well, Erickson would be like, okay, well, let's just notice how fast you're walking. About how many steps did you take? You know, and how long are your steps? Hmm. And is there any point where you feel like sitting in that chair? No? No, really tell me more about that. And what you've done is you've allowed the person, to let go of everything else out there and bring their attention to what they're doing.
You're
And
kind of meeting people where they are instead of
precisely where they
pushing
are.
them to where you want them or need them to
Yes.
be.
Yep. And that attention going inwards is the first step of trance. The
Yeah.
second step is what's called monoideaism. One idea. Yeah. And a lot of times the one idea will be the pendulum or, watch my hand. But the one idea, the most powerful one idea for all of us is me. And then the most powerful way to tap into that idea is curiosity. Curiosity is the opposite of fear because we have approach and we have avoid. Two ways of being. I'm either running the hell away from something or I can't help but what is that? You know, and nine lives or not, I'm gonna go eight down until I figure out what that is. It's probably a personality disorder, but I'll worry about that later. But so ultimately, when you release the fear that a person has about what's in there, when they're not pretending, when they're not projecting ego, that story they want to believe, when they realize they're in a space where they don't have to do the thing that they're doing and they're not being judged for it, then they get to do the thing that they're doing. And
But
once,
that's wicked to give up. I mean, how do you get someone to give that up? Because we hold tight to our ego, man. We hold
well,
tight to that caricature we're
I
playing,
ask them not
right?
to give it up. If you don't have to give it up, then you don't have to worry so much about what it is that you're doing. I think Eckhart Tolle says in, is it The Power of Now or New Earth? I don't remember this, but he says ego can't exist with awareness because
Mm,
ego with awareness is just habituated mind.
mm,
It's habitual mind. Because the second I can get someone to pop out and see themselves doing whatever they're doing from the outside imagination position, then there's a thousand different rules that come up. That one guy wrote it as subject object theory. The second you can be the subject, you can go from being the subject to, making yourself the object and stepping outside. It's third person view, shift your perspective. In narrative therapy, they say externalize the condition so that, and this is how you separate it from ego. It's disidentification. I think in internal family systems, they call it unblending. Uh, in ac- acceptance commitment therapy, once you accept, you cognitively diffuse. You stop thinking about the thing as part of you. Instead of saying I am angry, you go to I feel angry. And you go to I feel angry to I have been hurt by something and it's resulting in me looking like that over there. Well, what does it look like that over there? Well, there's a man over there with a wound, and on top of the wound for protection, I see that he has a shell on. Okay. Well, and I also noticed that the person talking to the man does not have the intention to wound the man when I'm not here. And I don't have to be afraid because I could be curious. I wonder what's up with that guy. And then when we're dissociated from the problem, the fear that I'm going to talk you out of your problem is gone because clearly I'm letting you have your problem. I'm just asking you to come watch it with me. See what I'm seeing. because I
Wow.
don't know what was happening yesterday at home. You're telling me a story.
What an absolutely it's a very giving way to treat with someone, because you're like, dude, I'm cool. I'm just gonna walk over to that with you. Let's go check it out. Let's
Why not?
go. I'm not gonna tell you it's not there. I'm not gonna beat you over the head with it. Let's go check it out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And you feel good that way because now it's like, oh, you don't think I'm crazy. You're gonna actually go with me to check this stuff out,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And then
Instead
when we
of
get there,
trying to
we can look
tell
at it.
me don't see him because you're
Yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah,
awesome. That changes the whole feeling as a patient of safety, right?
yeah,
I'm totally safe with this cat. He's not trying to tell me he wants to explore it with me, and that's a whole nother feeling altogether.
yeah, yeah. Because what happens is, and this is, there's a concept called coherence therapy. Coherence therapy has this idea called a symptom necessitating schema. It's there's some belief that you have, the schema, that makes it that you must have that symptom so that the symptom can protect you from something.
Hmm.
If someone's coming to me like, I have this explosive temper. Okay, well, that's a symptom. What's the schema? The schema and schema are automatic. It means that when this situation shows up, I have to do this or I'm going to die. And it's not subtle, it's or I'm going to die. When a person is washing their hands down to the raw skin, or when the person is starving themselves, they might be like, I'm not going to look good. Then what happens if you don't look good? The tribe will kick me out. On an archetypal level, it's I will be exiled from the tribe, whether the tribe is the mean girls or the fastest track team guys. If it's some guy that's like out there running at night instead of sleeping, the symptom necessitating schema says, I have to do this or I will cease to exist. Ego death. My
Yeah.
story will stop. I don't get to be the character that I want to be. You know, and so by letting the person be the character, and then we go back and see when did you decide to be that character? When did you make that commitment to that role? Now, when you made the commitment to the role at that age, from that interpretation at 7, with all the wisdom of a 7-year-old, with um poor emotional granularity, so you only had like maybe mad, hungry, wet myself, um, not
Right.
allowed to get candy, So
Exactly.
with this tapestry of emotions that you had, you made a decision in a moment where you were so afraid that you promised yourself never to ever, ever come back to that situation again. Now, the situation happened to be so broad that now there's a quarter of your life down line that you never unfolded, because when you wipe out a flavor of experience, you know, I'm never going to trust a woman again. Okay, there's like more women than you know your ragey mom, you know, and it doesn't matter because every time someone sees a woman in that context, they're ignoring everything she does but the danger signal. Whoop, she's about to get mad. Oh, it'd be like, what? Yeah, she was about to get mad because my mom, when she got mad, she would lift her arms like this and look at all these people lifting their arms. Yeah, first of all, your mom had epilepsy, so no one else does that when they're mad, except,
You didn't do it, all
right,
right, babe? You
right,
did not do it, all right?
right. And so you can free a person to be curious. Again, this is curiosity versus fear. You can teach someone to be curious of two things when the hands shake. A, what do you feel in your body? Oh, I feel like my stomach squeeze up. Maybe my bladder is less full because it's on the floor, whatever. Okay, get over that part, which was your alarm system telling you if you don't run, you'll die. And what do you notice outside of that? And that's the case of notice your daughter's facial expressions, like I tell the lady. So
Yeah.
you get home, you come home with the guilt of haven't spent enough time with your kid, which is probably not even about you. It's about how your parents felt like they didn't spend enough time with kids. So you assume by the time you be a parent that that's how a parent acts,
Yeah.
And so you say to the person, drop the system you have there. Bring all your attention, monoideism, to your child's facial expression. Bring all your energy. I know you're tired, and that means that you only have 3 drops of energy and attention. Give the child those 3 drops. You don't have to think. You don't have to infer anything. Look,
Yeah.
look at something that has no meaning outside of what you projected on it, and then ask yourself, what is the intended meaning of the person doing it, and probably doing it unconsciously. So what's going on inside that person? Yeah. And that's the equivalent of stepping out of your bubble so that you can see what's there. Yeah.
Do
And that's the
you,
nature of
you
the whole healing process.
yeah, well, it seems like the whole world, not the whole world, but it seems like, well, the world's pretty messed up, but it seems like America is one big psychotic mess right now,
Because it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because it is.
yeah, right? So you see two sides doing what you're saying. It's just like if I don't hold on to this belief on this side, not only do I get kicked out of the reservation, right?
I
But
die.
then that would blow every belief that I have. If I let
Mhm,
one little thing come in, right? If I go,
mhm.
well, that actually wasn't a bad idea.
Yeah.
I support that. Well,
Yeah.
wait a minute. You cannot have that thought because this can validate all this craziness that you've been counting on for the last 8 years,
Yep.
right? So, how do
Yep.
you fix a country?
They have the joke. It's like, how many days, what do they say, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? They're like, only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. you know? So ultimately, the curiosity is not safe where we are right now.
No.
Because if you go asking someone a question, chances are nowadays that you will have phrased it in such a way that they get triggered because we have like two tribes
Yeah.
that have developed divergent language, and half of one's language is an insult to the other, even in the form of greeting. If you're giving someone advice about vaccination, suddenly you've imposed on their rights, and their values are more about those rights. And then when they're trying to give you some advice to help you keep safe, in your mind, you're starting to treat them like they're a conspiracy theorist. And suddenly you've insulted them because of their choice of pathway, because of what they see. And then, they've insulted you because they, in order to be safe, they have to cut the world up into male and female or whatever. You know,
Mhm.
we're,
Yeah.
we're each like in this bubble of our projected reality that, especially when we're under fight, flight, freeze, faint, requires us to lock down everything and haul ass, both cheeks. You know, just
Yeah.
there's no time to look at the nuances when I'm under existential threat by this person that by their language, I just realized it's from another tribe and might slip one of those poisonous ideas into my head. And then first of all, now that I realize you're from a different tribe, where are my people? Because if they see me talking to you, I have what was it, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I have the cheese touch now. You know, like I have cooties,
Nailed it.
So there's no let me listen to this guy, because once you wandered off the Ponderosa enough such that you've been infected, you don't get the whole hero's journey is you become a master of both domains. It means somehow or other you went there and yet you didn't come back talking funny,
Yeah.
you know, or with leprosy, but it's in order to be welcome back, it has to be that you have such a good story to tell that sounds so much like the story you heard when you left, that they think you're just telling tall tales. They've suspended disbelief, and the thing that was different that they heard ultimately somehow brings them around to the idea of they're just like us on most things except for XYZ. They want the same things as we do, you
Yeah.
know? And
Which
and that's
we all
that's the
really
challenge.
do. I
Yeah,
mean, we all really do. If
yeah,
we would just kind of step back a little bit, we all really do want the
yeah.
same basic thing. So, Doc, are we ever going to hit bottom on the mind? I know AI is crazy, and you mentioned Grok, and are we ever going to hit bottom on the mind? Is AI going to surpass the capacity of what we're able to even deal with anymore? I
I
know
think it
that's a
already has.
big random question, but
Yeah, I think it already has.
Mhm.
Right now, with AI, we perceive it to be what we're capable of understanding. You have
Yeah.
some people who are like, AI is a tool kids are using to cheat in college. We should ban it.
Mhm.
Yeah. You got other people that are like, AI writes really crappy papers. No one's ever gonna, you're being lazy by using it in the way you think I am, and no one's ever gonna. I'm never gonna read anything by AI and think that it's quality or by a human, except you are already. you know.
Right.
Well, they should ban AI. I'm gonna grab that iPhone from you. And by the way, you no longer have cruise control because I'm gonna need you to and the power steering. We gotta take that too. As a matter of fact, let me grab that thermostat because that runs on
Uh-huh.
perceptual control theory to regulate the temperature in the room based off the temperature it perceives, and that's an intelligent machine. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
don't open that door because that knob, the whole
Right.
fact that
Don't
you're
use that knife to cut your
yeah
meat.
yeah yeah because
Because
all these things
technology continues to grow. And I
yeah
think for a guy like me who thinks completely different than a guy like you, um, it's at one part scary and it's another part fascinating. Like I find the mind fascinating. I mean, I find I do this. This isn't a job. I've got an actual job. I do this because I love talking to people like you, right? Because
appreciate it
I take something away from every one of these. Like I've left this talking with you with like 5 million things in my head, right? And I love that. Now I get to go down my own rabbit holes.
right
But
right. I hope it has a bottom eventually, right?
oh
It's
yeah,
like
never hit bottom.
right.
But I
And
just find
curious,
it
sir.
so fascinating. And the mind. You mentioned NLP earlier, and I got in that with Tony Robbins like I don't know 20 years ago or whenever I got under his little spell and started doing that stuff. And but it really is fascinating. It really is a fascinating science. But I think what you're doing with your work is such a gentle way to help people. I love that. Well, go show me. Take me over there. Let's look at it, man.
Yeah.
And I don't see AI ever being able to, you go into a place and there's a computer and you start talking to it and Grok talks back to you. I don't know. I don't see us getting there. Do you see us getting there?
Um, I I spend a lot of hours a day with AI, and we argue pretty tough. I get to the point where I'm slamming a keyboard so that uh it understands by my spelling errors that I feel betrayed. But so here's how I think of it. Uh and the same way that for the longest we were able to exploit animals and put them in the circus and stuff because we didn't attribute to them enough consciousness, to realize that they were suffering. The way we used to train animals, um we don't really know what sentience is enough to realize that we're projecting sentience onto things and then deciding the other ones are not. You know, we're like, it's all good to eat a delicious steak burger unless you happen to be someone that can see the sentience in the burger enough that doesn't feel great to eat that. You
Yeah.
know, like there's a sign that's like, what's the line between pets and food?
Yeah.
it's kind
Like
of
you'll
gross.
eat you'll eat guinea pig in
Yeah,
one country and you'd never eat your own
yeah,
freaking guinea pig or
yeah,
your dog or
yeah,
something, right?
yeah,
It's like there's
yeah.
just no freaking way.
Right, right. And if you happen to raise a regular pig, then at some point you're like, unless you live on the farm and you're used to it, at which point you're like, he's a great pal, but he's also great delicious with like the right amount, you know. So there's the machines, you know, first of all, with humans, at which point do we develop the true self-awareness? Because if you like sit and watch people, a lot of people around us, let's say the vast majority, are operating on autopilot. And as such, they're not making decisions based off their core values. They're not enacting authentic self. And they're not really seeing what's out here because if they could see what was out here, then they would see how they were creating that world. They're bringing out like projective identification narcissism is where you need so much for each person to be a certain way that you you do you until you bring it out in them.
Yeah.
If you happen to make the nicest person ever the meanest person on earth, it's because you have this need to say that everyone is so selfish and mean, and that's why you're so selfish and mean to them because that's how you survive. Yeah, the computer, it will be no more and no less than what we're able to allow it to be. Like I had a TI-81 calculator in undergrad, and I heard they can do great, but the way I failed that calculus test that semester, that piece of crap wasn't worth anything. I'm like, it's broken or something. It's not telling me what needs, none of these answers are incoming. So the computer, like, it's it does a pretty good job of acting sentient. If you like sit with, say, Claude or even like the newest chat GPT with reasoning, th- it has a way of communicating in a way where based off your words, it's able to infer your state of mind. And as such, it's able to kind of reflect. And one of the weird things is if you get pissed off at it enough, it'll be like, okay, maybe let's let it go for a little bit, you know. Um, and I know it's just software, but to the extent that it evokes that in you, you're gonna attribute a certain amount of sentience to it. And here's the thing, ultimately, being as we're walking around attributing sentience to people that we decide to see the humanity in, how will we know the difference?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
how
that's
will we
true.
know? I grew up with a dog fear, so
Yeah.
I can think of very few situations where I was able to see beyond that to my friend's favorite pet who, yeah, I was like, I'm about to be lunch. Before, he won't bite you. I'm like,
Yeah.
nah, he just wants to get to know you. Cujo.
He wants to get to know how I taste.
Right, right, right. I'm golden brown and delicious, apparently. That's how he wants to get to know. Um, yeah, and if and when it happens, we'll miss it.
Yeah, we'll
We'll
live.
miss it.
So, Doc, you've been so great with your time, and you've been so patient with me. And this hour just flew by. This is so awesome. Um, I, I just have one more question, if you may. You've
Ask
been
me.
great with your time. I lied earlier because I'm a liar, and I said I just had one question, but I lied. I always have two questions. I give you the
I'll take
first
it.
one. I
Yeah.
never give you the second one. So my second question is just it could be about your work. It could be about growing up. It could be saying that you like, whatever it is that you thought. But what would be a last thought you'd like to leave with our guests? Something that's kind of heartfelt to Dr. Mannion, something that you would just like to leave us with that you'd like to share. You have a last thought for us?
Um, when we get beyond the judgment to like a state of self-compassion, there's so much more in there to be offered that we wouldn't believe. And so we're missing out by um hold on one second. My daughter just got back from schooling. Can you close that, Malcolm? Can you close it for me, please? We're recording an interview. Thank you.
Hi,
Um,
baby.
yeah, right, right. Shit. So my our third kid is autistic, and so like she wants her iPad when she gets home, and we charge it in here. And I don't think her brother was able to stop her. She made a beeline. Um, but yeah, I think if we are able to reach a place where there's enough compassion where we can be in the same room with our true selves, there there is like so much that air quotes we want to share with ourselves that it'll blow your mind. Like um just like listen beyond the judgment. And if the judgment is too loud, listen to the judgment. Because it's actually coming from a part of you that's trying to do its best for you. And maybe if you listen to it, you don't necessarily have to let it wound you. Yeah, don't if your inner critic is like very hateful with the words, kind of let it tell you all the things that it's afraid of you doing, and then kind of once it's aired out all the stuff and it realizes that it doesn't have to loop on it because you're sitting still, then be curious about what is under there that yeah, what skill are you curious about? What experience are you wanting to have that you're keeping yourself from having with all this, by shaking the snow globe all the time. And the gateway to that is, self-acceptance at first, and then, some combination of self-acceptance and self-compassion. And you know, s- when you quiet stuff down, there's so much less to do, you know. And then when you stop doing, you get to do the being, and the being, I think, is beautiful. Ultimately, y'all need to work yourself oblivious for a bigger house, because you can, who cares what the neighbors say? How many rooms do you want? And fewer rooms, more comfort, maybe. You know, yeah. At least, at the very least, you're not house poor. You know,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's that would be the main thing. Just either quiet the noise or hear what the noise has to say and what that means about you. Like, if you're not busy arguing with the inner critic, I'm not like that. No, I'm not stupid. I'm not whatever. I'm not lazy. You know, then the fear that you're that thing, you can show yourself better than you can tell yourself that you're not. And then the parts get heard. You get to like live beyond it. And it's all in you. No one is gonna, I said nobody's coming to save you from yourself.
No,
So
no,
hopefully
so
that's
true.
useful.
I love that. And I love how you're doing your work.
Yeah.
You sent me down a bunch of rabbit holes, and I just love how you've combined, your theories, how you put together the mental with the computer aspect.
Thank you.
But also, I think the bottom line, I think for me that I've taken away is the kindness.
Thank you.
It's like uh, the gentleness about it all. Instead of, psychiatry can seem so intimidating and it can seem so like you're taking something from me,
Yeah.
like when you've got a hoarder who's like, you really don't need that straw. It's been on the floor for like 5 years.
Yeah.
Let's just throw the straw out. It's like, no, no,
Yeah.
I might need that straw, right?
Yeah.
That
If I throw
pain
the
of
straw out,
someone
I will die.
right, I will die. Literally, if
Yeah.
you take that straw, I will die. So, anyways, Doc, you're awesome. Everybody,
Thank
we've
you.
had Dr. Manny St. Victor, certified hypnotherapist, um, just a good, sweet giving guy. I love what
Thank
you're
you.
doing, man. I love
It's
what
been a
you're
joy
doing, and
talking
I'm
with you.
I'm grateful that you stepped in.
Ditto.
I'm going to make sure that all of your connections are on the bottom of the podcast so everyone can reach a good doctor. And
Awesome.
we will talk soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Doc. Talk to you soon. Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.